Huanoa ke kino kapuia ko heiau e ke apua. Huanoa noa walele alele alo no ke apua mana mama. Aloha wakea kako. Aloha no. As we begin, I want to point out my training in dual worlds. I graduated from Western Academia as a PhD ecologist, and I've enjoyed a 40-year career now in conservation biology, most of it with the Nature Conservancy of Hawaii. But I was also traditionally trained by a renowned master of Hawaiian chant and ceremony, Kumujan, Keola Makainana, Kalahu Yokalani no Kamehameha Ekolu Lake, who put me through the traditional rites of passage to emerge as a kahuna kakalaleo, Hawaiian chant practitioner. This dual training is kind of a pivotal factor in sharing with you about Pu'ukohola today, both as a researcher and a scientist, and also as a Hawaiian cultural practitioner. Because a significant part of that training was to serve as kahuna pule at Pu'ukohola Heiau, as part of Nawa'ala Lani Kahuna o Pu'ukohola. To start then, Pu'ukohola is a name typically afforded to the luakini of Kamehameha I. It takes the name of the hill upon which it was built, Pu'ukohola, the hill of the humpback whale, sometimes just named the hill of the whale. But as you know, there are two major words for whale, and kohola refers to the humpback whale, which seasonally are seen breaching in the waters off of Kauai High. The other word for whale is palaua, which is the term for toothed whales, such as the sperm whales that provided the royal symbol of the Opu'u. Best symbolized by the paramount chief, the ali'i nui of Hawaii Island in the time of Kamehameha's youth, Kalani Opu'u. The word Opu'u, in fact, means whale tooth pendant, and Kalani Opu'u means the royal one bearing the whale tooth pendant. No coincidence that he was also referred to as Kalei Opu'u, the whale tooth lei. Although Kamehameha I was not born of Kalani Opu'u, when his father, the Kohala chief, When his father, the Kohala chief, Keoua Kalani Kupu Apai Kalani Nui Ahi Lapalapa, died, he commended his son, Kamehameha, to the care of Kalani Opu'u, who received Kamehameha and treated him as his own. So before his death in 1782, Kalani Opu'u had designated his eldest son, Kiwala'o, to succeed him as High Chief of Hawaii, but also had the wisdom to designate Kamehameha as the keeper of the war god Kuka'ilimoku. Interestingly, this made Kamehameha a warrior, a chief, and a priest, since he had to see to all of the protocols for Kuka'ilimoku, which in addition to warfare would also be the god of governance. Kalani Opu'u's edict to Kamehameha was like this: your land and your endowment shall be the god Kuka'ilimoku. If during your life your lord, Kiwala'o, should molest you, take possession of the kingdom. But if the molestation be on your part primarily, you will be deprived of the god. Shall I dance? Okay. Friction over the redistribution of the lands led to battle between various island chiefs following Kalani Opu'u's death, and Kiwala'o was killed at Moku'ohai, Kona, by Ke'aumoku of Kona. However, this led to further instability, and the districts of Ka'u and Puna under Kamehameha's cousin Keo'uaku'ahu'ula and Hilo under Keawe Mauhili did not recognize Kamehameha's dominion of Hawaii, essentially splitting the island in half. Thus, Kamehameha had control of western Hawaii Island, Kona, Kohala, and Hamakua districts, and during the 8 years following the death of Kiwala'o, fought a number of inconclusive battles with Hilo, Puna, and Ka'u, which together comprised the eastern half of the island. Interestingly enough, you can see products of my Hawaiian Footprint project, which tried to ascertain the ecological human footprint of ancient Hawaii prior to contact. And the areas in magenta are those places where people lived, worked the land, etc. And you can gauge from the size of that footprint how many people were in each of those districts, and you can tell Kona was fed by that Kona agroforestry system, right? They call it the Gardens of Kona. Kohala had the huge Waimea field system for sweet potato. But Puna and Hilo and Ka'u were no small sheikhs either. And each of those were able to maintain their armies. It's as if you had 3 islands in one, right? I mean, for the districts. Wait, 1, 2, 3, 6 islands in one, and 3 of them battling against the 3 others. Okay, where was I? Now I got this. Okay, but on other fronts, Kamehameha was more successful, and by 1790, Kamehameha had invaded Maui, Lanai, and Molokai. And while he was on Molokai, he sent an emissary to Pu'ukohola, the famous Hulihonua soothsayer of Kauai, to ask what he must do to control all of the island of Hawaii. And Pu'ukohola's reply was this: build a home for Kamehameha's god, Kuka Ilimoku, at Pu'ukohola. Kamehameha returned from Maui later in 1790 to fend off an attack by Keauaku'ahu'ula. That battle too was inconclusive, and Kamehameha returned to Kauai to focus efforts on the building of the heiau prescribed by Pu'ukohola. Kamehameha's building of Pu'ukohola, though, was taken by a sign of all the chiefs of the rest of the islands that if he should build that heiau, he would be unstoppable. So, And in a last effort to intervene in its completion, a combined fleet was sent by the ruling chiefs of Kauai, Oahu, and Maui. They were met at sea off of Waipio and defeated in the battle called Kepu Wahaulaula, the red-mouthed gun. And this is a reference to the first major use of canoe-mounted cannons in Hawaiian ocean warfare. By a fortunate coincidence, some months earlier, 2 sailors, John Young and Isaac Davis, had been captured by the men of Kamehameha, but were well treated by Kamehameha and soon became advisors to him, particularly in the use of Western firearms and cannons. Although the opponent canoes at Kepu Wahaulaula were also equipped with guns, Kamehameha's fleet received superior training, and both Young and Davis were on hand to help guide the battle. With this last major obstacle fended off, Kamehameha could devote huge human resources to the building of Pu'ukohola. Where the heiau was built, Pu'ukohola, the hill Pu'ukohola, was by all accounts the site of an older temple from the time of the chief Lono Ikamakahiki in the latter decades of the 1500s. Fornander recorded from his sources that a revolt began on Hawaii while Lono Ikamakahiki was visiting Kakuhihewa's court on Oahu, which hastened his return, and landing at Kealakekua, he began gathering his forces. They met and routed the rebels in 2 battles, but reinforced from Kohala and Hamakua, the rebels gave 2 other engagements at Pu'upa and at Pu'ukohola, near the heiau of that time, in both of which Lono was victorious, and Kanaloa Kapalehu, one of the 4 revolting brothers, was taken prisoner, slain, and sacrificed at the heiau. Pu'ukohola was one of several named heiau consecrated by Lono Ikamakahiki as acknowledgement to the gods for his victories after he had restored peace and order. This indicates that a heiau at Pu'ukohola, the Pu'u, was in existence in the time of Lono Ikamakahiki. But the new heiau of Kamehameha at Pu'ukohola was built entirely by hand with no mortar in less than a year. The larger water-worn stones were transported by a human chain involving thousands of people, a line of people that would have, not necessarily at one time, but a line of people that was necessary to move stones with material from as far away as Pololu Valley on the north coast of Kohala. Construction was supervised by Kamehameha's brother, Keli'i Maikai. Fornander wrote, relays of people were summoned from Kona, Kohala, and Hamakua to come to Kauai to carry stones and assist in the building. Chiefs of the highest degree and common natives worked side by side, and Kamehameha himself set the example of carrying stones to the building. So I was curious to see what route would be taken. You know, if you went from Pololu to Kauai, and you know how our modern highways often follow the old paths, right? Often follow the old roads. And so part of that highway that runs along actually skirts the famous Waimea field system, and so it makes sense that they would have been going along that route. But I threw a USGS topo map to see if there were any gulches that needed to be crossed, and this line, this yellow line, is the line of least resistance from Pololu to Kauai. On my screen, it's beautifully contrasting bright orange, yellow on a dark green, but over here you can barely make it out. I apologize in advance. And I will continue to do so. Fornander in 1877, so this is an important date to remember, 1877, because how many years after Pu'ukohola's building in 1791 is that, right? A few years ago, I conversed with a centenarian Hawaiian at Kauai, who had assisted in carrying stones building this heiau. Amazing to run into somebody who gives an account, talking to somebody who was actually there. His description of the thousands of people encamped on the neighboring hillsides and taking their turns at work, of their organization and feeding, their time of work and time of relaxation, the number of chiefs that attended, and the number of human victims that were required and duly offered for this or that portion of the building. This description was extremely interesting and impressive, says Fornander, concludes Fornander. I was talking with someone afterwards about, how many people would this have been? And some people said, over 20, and some people said, exactly 11, and some people said, but I thought, okay, if you do one for each kihi, that would be 4. If you do 2 for each kihi, that would be even better. So that would be 2, 4, 6, 8. And then you have the 3 terraces, and then you would have the raised platform upon which the anu'u and the lele would be put, and then you have the platform for the different hale. We'll go over those parts in a moment. But yeah, you get to 11 and over pretty quickly. Okay, where am I? There we go. The result, completed in the summer of 1791, was a massive structure some 225 feet long and 100 feet in width, with massive walls on north, east, and south sides. So to orient you, the side farthest from us is the east side. The north is that shorter wall there, and the south is that side, and then west is facing us. And a series of large terraces stepping down the west face toward the sea. These terraces face another heiau down slope, Mailekini. And you can see my dim labels and the 2 heiau, hopefully. Although the name Mailekini is translated as many maile vines in as many places as I could look, there is no further elaboration that I could find on why this heiau, so far from the habitat of maile, in mesic and wet forests high above, would bear that name. Below Mailekini was one more heiau, Haleo Kapuni, described as a heiau dedicated to a shark deity. In some sources, Kapuni was a kahuna nui in the time of Keawe. Unlike Mailekini and Pu'ukohola, it was partly submerged and smaller in the estuary of Pelekane at the mouth confluence of Makahuna, Palihai, and Makeahua streams, themselves fed from many smaller gulches in the flank of Kohala Mountain. Since estuaries are ideal for sharks to both feed in the fish-rich brackish waters as well as breed, that heiau is, it makes sense that there would be a shark heiau down there. One of the early ceremonies that I took part in was pre-dawn. The Nakoa, the Kahunas, various other folks take off all of our clothes, enter into the waters of Pelekane to purify. And while we're in there, Sam Ka'ai, standing on the trail below the heiau, calls out, "You best be on your guard, for there are many sharks around you," And I thought he was telling the kahunas, you're surrounded by Nakoa, and so be on your guard and everything, right? But no, there were actually sharks all around us as we're in there, naked in the sea at Pelekane Bay. But nobody got hurt. Let's see, where am I now?
What are those smart?
Yeah, you can see the fins sticking up. Yeah, the fins of the sharks. You best be on your guard. Okay. So that heiau is not visible now. It's covered over by sediments out of Pelekane Stream, which floods often, and also by construction of the expanded Kauai Harbor, and by several tsunami that had broken through. The National Park Service has this cool picture of a rectangular shadowy outline that you can see in Pelikane Bay as the waters receded for the 1946 tsunami. So this was before Kauai Harbor was expanded and covered over a portion of it. But, you know, that was like probably the best picture ever taken of I was hunting for that on the web and I couldn't find it. If somebody finds it, let me know. By the time of the completion of Pu'ukohola, Keo'ua's forces had been diminished significantly by ongoing battles. And in 1790, that's 1 year before the building, returning to Ka'u from a battle in Hilo, a large portion of his army was caught in an eruption of Kilauea, and 2/3 of his forces, by some describers, were killed by heavy ashfall and toxic gases, leaving footprints in volcanic ash still visible today. According to one Hawaiian historian, badly shaken by this disaster, no doubt believing that Pele had turned against him, Keo'ua lost the will to continue the war. The story of Keo'ua Ku'ahu'ula's death and sacrifice at Pu'ukohola is well known, but not well understood by either Western or Hawaiian historians. Perhaps he agreed to be taken to Pu'ukohola under the pretense of peace negotiations, as some have suggested. Others suggest he knew full well that going there would mean his death and sacrifice, and he chose to do so to spare his subjects in Ka'u and Puna from battle and slaughter. One indication that he knew he was to be sacrificed is seen in the story of his stop at Luahinewai, which is a large, beautiful ankyline pool on the north end of Kiholo Bay. That was on his way by canoe to Pu'ukohola, where he bathed and then undertook a ceremony called Omu'o, which is defined as to cut off, in which he purposefully mutilated himself, cutting off the end of his manhood so as to offer an imperfect sacrifice to Kamehameha. After Pu'ukohola was built and dedicated, it seemed nothing could stop Kamehameha on his way to unification of the archipelago under his rule. And for over 20 years afterward, Kamehameha kept his luakini active. Herb Kane's rendition of Pu'ukohola is based on several historical descriptions for placement of the various structures and images there. And in this more diagrammatic view, we can see some of the major structures placed upon the inner pavement of the luakini. The tall, three-tiered, kapa-covered Anu'u Tower, also called the Lana Nu'umamau, for the 3 levels. The low Lana, where offerings are placed, the middle Nu'u, where some of the Heiau priests could go for ceremony, and the highest Mamau level, where only the Ali'inui and the Kahuna Nui could conduct ceremony. The row of Ki'iakua, the god images, with the large central figure of Kuka'ilimoku. In front of them is the Lele, or offering platform, upon which sacrifices are placed. The Hale Pahu, where the temple drums are kept when not deployed. The small Hale Waia, where the Aha ceremony of divination was conducted by the Ali'inui and the Kahuna. The Hale Umu, the oven house, at which the fires of the Heiau are ignited and kept. And don't be confused by the duplicate presence of Kuka'ilimoku that fronts the Hale complex on the raised central platform. It used to puzzle me. I said, well, which one is Kuka'ilimoku, right? Recall that in addition to these large wooden images of the war god, there are also multiple akuahulu, or feather images bearing the name Kuka'ilimoku. There are also many multiple kinolau, physical manifestations in nature for any given akua, so there might very well be multiple human-created forms for any given akua. Finally, there is the largest Hale Mana, arguably the most sacred of the Heiau structures, used by the Ali'inui and the Kahuna during the Kapu periods. There will be a quiz. During Kamehameha's life, he remained faithful to traditions and to the gods that sustained him, and whose assistance he credited with his unification of the islands. This despite growing awareness of the outside world and the pressures to change. After his death, those pressures continued to build. And during the start of the reign of his son, Kamehameha II, Iolani Liholiho, he began with ceremonies at Pu'ukohola, recorded by the artist aboard the French corvette Uranie, under Captain Freycinet. Kauai High was the first landfall of the Huhani in Hawaii in the fall of 1819. And the sketch made then showed that Pu'ukohola was still active with its structures and images in place. And according to the description, Liho Liho is sitting in front of this halen in the front, while the rest of his party is under the shaded patio. But it was not long after the death of Kamehameha I that Liho Liho declared an end to the kapu system after consulting with both the Queen Regent Ka'ahumanu and the Kahuna Nui Hewa Hewa. In a dramatic and highly symbolic event, Kamehameha II ate and drank with women, thereby breaking the most important eating kapu, the ai kapu. And as George Kanahele says, quote, when the ruling ali'i of the realm renounced the old religion in 1819 with the collaboration of no less a person than Hewa Hewa, the high priest of the whole kingdom, the foundation upon which the validity of the kahuna had for so long rested crumbled and fell away. This was not universally accepted, especially not by Kekua o Kalani, in whose care Kamehameha's war god Kuka Ili Moku had been placed, just as Kamehameha had received it at Kalani Opu'u's passing. There was a decisive battle over the abolition of the kapu, and Kekua o Kalani, his wife Manono, and their followers were killed at Lekeleke in South Kona in the Battle of Kuamo'o, the last stand of the old ways. After Liho Liho abolished the kapu system, it ended the formal worship of gods and ritual use of the large heiau. They were abandoned, many were destroyed or dismantled, their paving and stones often incorporated into regional house sites or agricultural walls, their wooden structures and images burned, disposed of, or hidden. The New England missionaries visited Pu'ukohola soon after the death of Kamehameha, and the Reverend Hiram Bingham stated that the temple at the time contained the ruins of several houses that had been burnt, as well as the ashes of the idols and remains of past offerings. In 1826, the Queen Regent Ka'ahumanu told the Reverend Artemis Bishop that all the buildings in the enclosure were destroyed in one day. However, perhaps because of the fame of Pu'ukohola, its major structure remained largely intact through the decades. Pu'ukohola Heiau was designated in 1928 as a historical landmark by the Hawaiian Territorial Government. In the 1960s, the Queen Emma Foundation, Queen's Medical Center, the Waimea Civic Club, and other local community groups were instrumental in getting Pu'ukohola Heiau designated as a National Historic Landmark. And the Queen Emma Foundation donated 34 acres of land encompassing Pu'ukohola Heiau to the U.S. National Park Service, and Pu'ukohola Heiau National Historic Site was enacted by Congress on August 17, 1972. In 1991, 200 years after the original completion of Pu'ukohola Heiau, a ceremony of reconciliation and rededication of Pu'ukohola was undertaken, in which there was participation not only by Hawaiians, but our Polynesian cousins from as far away as Samoa, Aotearoa, and Rapa Nui. It was in preparation for these ceremonies and for the continued growth of Hawaiian practice that Sam Ka'ai, Parli Kanakaole, Hale Makua, John Keola Lake, Maikumu, shown here, Daniel Kawai'ai'a, and many of the stakeholder descendants from Kohala and across Hawaii Island began training of Nakoa and Kahuna in the name of Ho'oku'ikahi, of reunification. Kumu Lake was in charge of training chanters, and I was enlisted to serve as a member of Nawa'ala Leni Kahuna o Pu'ukohola. The name translates roughly as the ordered parallel priestly rows of Pu'ukohola, after a traditional description of Luakini ceremonies that you can find in Malo and Kamakau, and pictured here by Herb Kane. We have been engaged in yearly ceremonies and workshops there ever since. To gather in the pre-dawn under torchlight upon the high platform of Pu'ukohola, offering the pule to honor Kamehameha and our ancestors under the stars of Kauai High, praying in traditional voice until the light of dawn greets us. It's a deeply moving experience for all of us who have had the honor and duty to go there. As practitioners active at one of the most significant and sacred sites of Hawaii, our mana'o is carefully considered by our national park hosts. I'd like to offer an example. Pu'ukohola and Mailekini Heiau were both severely damaged by the October 15, 2006 earthquake. I was at Kona Villages on the morning of the earthquake, and the epicenter was right offshore, like 5 miles offshore. And 7:30 was breakfast call at the restaurant down by the shore. And so we had already left those rickety hale that they used to have around there. And we're heading down the road in the open, thank goodness. And then I heard this amazing, low, descending hum. Like, boom, like it seemed to come from everywhere. And I had just enough time to think, oh, that's the sound that the earth makes just before a major... And then the earth started shaking. It was amazing, and the ground was shaking underfoot right and left, and the coconut trees were snapping right and left. And because Kona is such a windless place, all the dust that was on the trees were puffing off to the right and then puffing off to the left as they swayed wildly back and forth. And then the shrubs and trees at a different harmonic were vibrating differently underneath them. And we were out in the open and safe, and so it was more fascinating to me than frightening. And then it ended. It seemed like it lasted a long time, but it must have been just seconds. And I turned and looked around me just to see what the world was doing. And the flows that were coming down to the highway above there, we looked like they were on fire. There was this brown smoke rising from all of them. And what it was the earthquake had just taken those rocks and were jamming them against each other so much they were disintegrating in the vibration and sending dust clouds up into the sky. That was just awesome. And then the screaming began. We heard screams from down below. We were walking down to the restaurant on the shore, right on the shore, right? And I thought, if those screams are because people see a tsunami, then we're all dead, right? But as it turns out, people had gone there early. They were sitting down waiting for the place to open. Doors had opened, they had just gone in, and then the shaking started, right? And as soon as it stopped, one of the staff, at the top of his lungs, yelled, "Run! Run for your lives!" Right? And so they were all screaming and running uphill. But, and if a tsunami came and he saved any of them, then that would have been great. He would have been a hero. But that's a different story. I will tell that later. Okay, where was I? So, this is Mailekini Heiau below, and you can see, maybe you can't, I don't know if there's a laser. Yeah, there is. Okay, so imagine this line of the wall going across to here, and then about 2/3 of the Heiau just crumbled into right? There's the big talus of the wall that had collapsed and poured in there. So that was major damage there. The worst damage at Pu'ukohola Heiau was to the high retaining walls bounding the sole access passage. So on the left is how it was before, and on the right is how it was after the earthquake. And I remember standing there in tears almost, because that was such a familiar entranceway to that place, and then to see it filled in like that, it was just quite downcasting. So shortly after the earthquake, we were invited to witness the damage firsthand and to meet with the National Park staff to talk about options. Other Heiau restorations and repairs had included heavy machinery, but we suggested to the Park Service that the Heiau had been built with only the hands and backs of kanaka and should be repaired in the same way. Moreover, we pointed out that as a sacred site, there must be continual pule during the work, and men must comply with kapu regarding their behavior while on the job, undergoing cleansing, protocols for entering, working, and exiting the heiau, etc. We enlisted Master Stoneworker Francis Sinensi from Hana to oversee the work, and he put out a call to Hawaiian men to come learn the ancient skill of Hawaiian stonework at Pu'ukohola and Mailekini, and many strong hands answered the call. It was a steep learning curve as teams of Hawaiian men, some of which had no previous rock experience, worked together at first on auxiliary structures that had been damaged. So here was a wall that was leading diagonally from Pu'ukohola, and that was where some of the training took place. Their skills quickly grew. That's the same wall afterwards. giving everyone confidence of their potential for the more challenging work on the Heiau structures themselves. Moreover, as my notes from those days stated, they are attentive to kapu and undergo purification, have learned basic oli and responses, and are a fine, strong group of Kanaka that I am proud to work with. Once he started on the Heiau, though, sacred protocols and restrictions were imposed, and that meant that while men were doing the physical work below, putting in long, demanding days during the hot sun of Kauai High, we were there also, above them and below them, providing continual pule of protection, of harm, of strength and persistence, of connection to ancestors, and of working with stone. The National Park Service took this duty seriously and even gave us official titles. I, for example, was called Cultural Safety Monitor Level 5. I want to share 3 stories from those days. The clearing of the entranceway. We were nearly in tears when we were standing in front of the entranceway, and some of the folks that were there, many who had participated at Pu'ukohola, were so moved they wanted to start moving rocks at once. And the national park, very hesitant, of course, about that. No liability. They hadn't had a chance to even think about what was going on there, right? But people wanted to do something already, and we put on the tea leaf lei, and we had brought our kihei with us because anytime you go to Pu'ukohola, you must be ready, and ready or not. We started the pule for protection and the like, and people were trying to at least clear the entranceway so that we could see what was going on. It wasn't a reconstruction, it was just moving the larger stones out of the way. And that in itself, right, you're working on an unstable, collapsed structure with only the pule to protect you, no gloves, nobody had anything yet, no preparations. And I remember standing in awe, continuing the chants, and watching people as old as Superintendent Koi'aia's father, white-haired Hawaiian man, taking stones that you would never think he'd be able to move, and just moving them up and out of the way. And afterwards they told us that it was as if someone else was moving the stones for them. So, yeah, that was amazing. Sorry. The other one was a little bit more irresponsible, and it taught me a lot, actually. We were there for 4 years, sometimes during the hottest time of the year. It's really blisteringly hot there, and you just literally pray for clouds or wind or the like. And one time we were up there and it was really hot, and we wanted some wind and we wanted some clouds to come over and block the sun for us. And so we started focusing our pule to lono chants. And as we did so, I noticed that there was one interesting portion of sky in which the clouds were kind of rotating. And so I pointed this out to others, and we started just focusing our pule on that. And that rotation clouded up, and pretty soon it covered over the sun. And we were all feeling very, encouraged by that. And so we redoubled our intensity of pule. It was about maybe 10 o'clock in the morning, just starting to get hot. Kauai High gets hot the instant the sun comes over the mountain. But we were so happy that it was cooler. And then the rain started. Marble-sized drops splashing down on us. And it made the, what do they call them? The wooden structures that we had set up in order to the scaffolding. It made them too slippery to use. And so they had to stop work. And so, they were kind of relieved that they could stop work. But while we were sitting waiting for the rain to stop, I glibly said, "Remember to always use your powers for good." So I remember saying that. What a stupid thing to say. Because shortly thereafter, Daniel Kauai looks up into the mountains and goes, "What is that? Goats?" And because it was clouds of dust, And I said, "No, there's no goats up there." But it was the Mumuku and the Apa'a winds coming to greet us. And when they were halfway down the mountain, the dust cloud, Danny Kawai recognized that, and he said, "Okay, we got to get the heaviest guys on the tent corners." And they were already weighted down, but he had them stand on the stones. And then the gusts came, dust covered, and pretty soon we're all kind of like caked a little bit with the red dust of Kohala as the tarp danced, pulling big Hawaiian guys up and down on the corners. And then it passed. And it was a lesson never to be glib about the pule that you do. So anyway, so that's story number 2. And then after that, we were much more careful and serious about our pule. And it was 4 years of periodic work while the Heiau was being done. And anytime you have 4 years with dozens and dozens of people working by hand only on a massive structure, moving boulders above head, below head, there's bound to be some major incident, but there were none. No major accidents or injuries in the 4 years that we were working there. It was a remarkable thing to me. Each of the men working on the walls and the kahune nui that prayed for them received recognition signed by President Obama. That was an unexpected delight. We also learned that our work to restore Pu'ukohola Heiau and Mailekini Heiau in a culturally appropriate way won the 2011 Secretary of the Interior's Partners in Conservation Award. But for us, the satisfaction was seen at the Heiau itself. After 4 years of work in 2010, there was a large reopening ceremony for the Heiau, once again attended by Kanaka from as far away as Aotearoa and Rapa Nui and across Hawaii. The temple drums sounded from the field below as well as from the paepae above. And for me, Pu'ukohola and Mailekini can never again be simply a historical footnote because I've devoted my ike and mana to them and have the honor, privilege, and kuleana to stand upon their hot pavements and offer pule. It's a humbling and enriching kuleana for any Kanaka today. Mahalo. Mahalo. There must be questions.
You know the map you showed where in the building of the Heiau, you showed the shortcut from Honolulu Valley to What in the picture?
Yes, they go down to the ocean, don't they?
Well, it's like they're coming down the steep cliff.
I think that's artistic license. Because you have the picture west facing, it's a very nice way to show the terraces. And Herb Kane also wanted to show that people needed to move the rocks in a line. And so he had to put them somewhere in the painting, and so he put them like down the slope toward Pelikani. No doubt they also brought Ili up from there and things like that. But to me, that thought came too. It's like, they should have been on the north side entrance heading off toward Pololu. But thanks for pointing that out. I wasn't the only one that thought about that.
I've only the other large heiau that I visited was on Molokai.
Molokai, Pepe Opai.
Yeah. So can you give me a sense of the size of this heiau in relationship to that one?
Pu'ukohola stands as one of the largest ones. Haleo Pi'ilani in Hana is much larger. It's the largest heiau in the Hawaiian Islands, I think. Ulupo is also pretty massive. When you look at Ulupo Heiau in Kailua by the YMCA over here, have you visited that one? You need to go see that one. From above, it goes out over Kauai Nui Marsh, and it seems larger in area than Pu'ukohola, but it's the face that faces Kauai Nui Marsh is really tall. It's very, very massive. So volume-wise, I think that one has it on Pu'ukohola. But Pu'ukohola is a large luakini.
Was the designation of the Heiau as a National Historic Landmark after or before they built that harbor? Because to me, that harbor just seems to say so much.
Yeah, no, the harbor construction was after its designation, I think. And I agree, the harbor, somebody should have looked at their EIS a little bit closer. Yeah. Haleo Kapuni certainly would have been affected deeply by that. Someone recently did a deep radar thing, trying to find Haleo Kapuni's outline, and did find a cluster roughly rectangular in size, right about where Haleo Kapuni should be. So maybe it's under the sediment. But as I stated before, people have noted that tsunami have affected it already. So it's probably a roughly rectangular field of stones that once were more highly structured.
Sam, can you talk about current management of the site and cooperation with Park Service with Hawaiian people?
So, you know, as practitioners there, and because we have Danny Kauai'a there as superintendent, he's particularly attentive. He's going to be retiring. He threatens to retire in a year or two. And when that happens, who knows who's going to come in, right? And who knows what their attitude is going to be with regard to the site. So he is trying hard to put together at least a draft of a long-term management plan for Pu'ukohola. We have some of a plan in place, but I don't know if it's sufficient for modern national park management.
I noticed some of the signage there for casual visitors, kapu, etc. It's part of the management.
Oh yeah, certainly. I mean, if you visit Pu'ukohola, they generally tend to keep you far away. And even if you go there as a Hawaiian with ho'okupu, the lele has been moved from Pu'ukohola's platform down to the field below. And so you can offer there safely, right? Part of it is not so much to prevent people from damaging the heiau as to keep people safe. Yeah, there are always consequences to people's actions. And
I'm glad you said that because I was there last spring with part of the hula conference, and I know the picture and where the Nu'u Tower was supposed to be inside. But when we got there, it was on the outside. But the person our guide didn't tell us why it was.
yeah, it's just to make, just so that, you know, on the one hand, you don't want people, it's hard to look at the heiau unless you're on the heiau. And so you either gonna have staff up there watching people, and it's not like you're in, there are unstable rocks and everything. There's all kinds of, you have to be careful when you're in there. But the other thing, of course, is to offer a place where people can go if they want to express cultural practice at that place.
Can you talk a little bit about the cultural connection with sharks? I know about the shark colors that come in. Here we're talking about the shark tail, partly submerged. Can you talk a little bit?
Yeah, because this wasn't a Haleo Kapuni talk, it was a Pu'ukohola talk, I kind of left out all of the parts that I had found on Haleo Kapuni. But if you look at any of the works that describe Pu'ukohola, especially those that were made in preparation for the designation as a National Historic Site, they went into length pulling together information that they could find. And there was much describing Haleo Kapuni. As I mentioned, I think one source said that Kapuni was a kahuna in the time of Keawe, and that was his hale. Haleo Kapuni was down there. There was a stone, there's a platform with a standing stone that's now half the size that it used to be. And at the national park, they picture an ali'i sitting and leaning against it. I don't know if that would have been the case. That's somebody's interpretation of that stone. But at any rate, it is an vantage point for if you were going to make offerings to the sharks at Haleo Kapuni. There's a description of a chair-like structure on the heiau itself, but now no one can see whether or not that's true, or even if it was true at one time, the place is so disturbed that it's hard to tell. But where offerings would have been placed for the sharks to come and get. It was described as partially submerged, which suggests that at one time there was, you know, a land section and then an ocean section, but there's no trace of that now. So very interesting. It's difficult to say, but of course the relationship between sharks and people everywhere you go in the Hawaiian Islands, right? As a form that aumakua can take, that akua can take, they would have been. And you know, every time you go to Pelikane or to Kauai or Pu'ukohola, the sharks are there. And so as an ever-present thing in your life, day-to-day life, that's going to be one of your relationships with the living universe around you there. So might as well have a positive reciprocal relationship with them than not. Yeah. So.
Hello, Sam.
Aloha.
On a from a broader perspective, there's some reports about impact of future ocean level rise in Hawaii specifically, and how it might affect numbers of traditional cultural sites. Do you have any thoughts about ways to protect them?
Good question. The question was, with sea level rise and with many of our cultural sites being on the shore or close to the shore, Haleo Kapuni is a really good example. It used to be partly on land and partly in the ocean, and now you can't even see the part that's in the ocean because it stands in a fairly dynamic place of river mouth that takes a lot of the slopes and erosion products of Kohala Mountains, and the ocean, which can occasionally send tsunami or just regular winter waves to that place. So, and as sea level rise, of course, you're going to have inundation of sites. You're going to have a disruption of sites from wave action that didn't ever see wave action. You know, the Keauho, Heiau that are on the flats right there on the shore. I mean, already at high tide, one of them is completely surrounded by water. So I think we're just going to see more and more of that. It's a gradual enough thing that people who are born in these generations will know that Heiau is always surrounded by water at high tide, even though 4 generations ago they would have said, no, it's never surrounded by water, even at high tide. And in the future, who knows when it will be a completely submerged structure, and what people will say about it then. As for protecting them, it's difficult. It's hard to move a massive structure. When the Aswan Dam was built in Egypt, they moved a section of Abu Simbel, right, out of harm's way and raised it up onto a hill that was it was almost symbolic cosmetic, right? You had a huge, who knows what else is now underwater from the Aswan Dam, but they wanted to recognize that yes, there was something significant there, and here you can still see a part of it. So I don't know whether or not we want to do that in Hawaii. It probably makes more sense if you're going to do anything at all to just be really aware of where your sites are, what their status is, and what might be done at the time to keep them in good shape.
In the image of Iolani Lihoio there in the hale below,
Yeah.
what was it like? Did Kamehameha live there? I know Queen Emma was born near there. Was it just a community of royals, or
A community of what?
of the royalty of the people there?
Royalty advisors, kahuna, their families. I would think that there would be a set of overlapping ohua that would have lived in the kauhale of the ali'i. So yes, and not always occupied, right? And in fact, Kamehameha himself, in doing Luakini, even though that was the one he had built, that wasn't the only one he practiced at. And so it talks about how on different years he would go to Mo'okini, he would go to other Luakini that were elsewhere. I don't know if he went to the other ones outside of where he grew up, Kona, Kohala, but certainly he made use of those major Luakini in that place, not just Pu'ukohola.
So it wasn't continuously inhabited. It was just like
Maybe not by Kamehameha himself, certainly not. But I would have thought that there would be a permanent retinue of folks that would be watching over that place. Yeah. Keli'imaikai oversaw much of the building of Pu'ukohola. Yeah, it could be that he would be, I don't know where he lived, we have to look that up. That's your homework. Where did Keli'imaikai, the younger brother, right, of Kamehameha?
But there was a couple, he wasn't allowed to participate.
He wasn't, he tried. He tried, he picked up a boulder, and Kamehameha immediately said, "You put that down," and he had men take it out to Haleo Kapuni and put it in the ocean. And then he said, "You are not going to touch another stone. You can stand here and tell people where to put stones, but you cannot touch another stone." Yeah. It's interesting how that kapu on his younger brother was played out. Yeah.
Can you talk about the human ecology of this area? Was this terraced and sweet potatoes around?
You know, the Pelikane certainly was the estuary, and I'm sure the fishing there was superb. And there probably was enough intermittent stream work to have some small gardens there, but the huge Waimea field system was just Mauka. And it would be nothing for people to walk the few miles to trade uala for i'a, right? So I'm sure they were well fed, even without having to grow anything right at that spot.
The big heiau that's at Pu'ukohola, I always was told that was Kamehameha's heiau. This is Kamehameha's heiau.
And this is in Kohala, so I'm not quite sure which one you're talking about.
This you can see from like Pu'ukohola, right? You can see this.
You can see this from the highway as you head down toward Kaihai, yes.
Up there, once you drive up, way up there, there's a big heiau.
You thinking about Mo'okini Heiau, maybe?
I would say it's probably 5 miles from the statue.
Oh, so,
West.
yeah. So probably Mo'okini then. That's the largest luakini I can think of in that direction. And as I said, Kamehameha would have practiced there as well, yes.
What was the purpose of Maile Kimi Heiau?
Good question. Mailekini is considered older than Pu'ukohola. Mailekini was described as the place in which Keaua's body was prepared before he was sacrificed up at Pu'ukohola. There are even stories of an underground lava tube that connects the two. But there are stories of underground lava tube connecting all kinds of things in Hawaii. So I was looking at that picture, that aerial that showed the thing, and indeed there's a ridge that goes between the two. And I thought, oh, I wonder if there's a lava tube underneath that thing. But but where it comes out, I don't know. Maybe out of one of the lua in the thing. You know that luakini means many pits, right? And refers to the many places in which the sacrifices would have been put. Okay, Maikai, any other questions?
Were there artifacts found when this work was being done?
When we did the repairs, there were not. There was only one partial, not even partial, just bone fragments found. And of course, work stops. The archaeologists for the park came to take a look at it. And because we had members of our group that were part of burial council, they huddled with the archaeologists, got kapa and la'i, wrapped them nicely, placed them back into the rock structure where they were found, and the rest of the rock work was completed around them. And then we just left them as we found them, pretty much. So. Yeah, no, we didn't find any more artifacts.
I'm curious, where exactly is the heiau for Okai?
Ili Opai. I'm sorry, Pepe Opai is the bog up on the top, my bad. Ili Opai is the heiau. It's down near the base of Mapulehu Ridge. So if you find Mapulehu Ridge on your USGS topo map and the highway, it's down at the bottom, and the topo map will actually say Ili Opai Heiau. It's actually a short walk from the highway, but it is on private land, so. And they will say no.
I'm trying to remember who it was that had it in the land.
Yeah.
I don't know, like 7 years.
Yeah, so you might know somebody who would say, yeah, you can go. I have been, because that's the ancient trail to Wailau. Up Mapulehu to the cliff trail of Kekumu, and you go down from there, and then come back out again, and you pass by Ili Opai as you go. So.
One last question.
Somebody had, I thought. No? Yay, then thank you very much.